Hi there, and welcome to the HR Podcast. This is Linda Misegadis
and Cyndi Manuel, and we'll be your co-hosts. After spending years working in and with HR, we thought, why not start a podcast to support the important HR community? We believe the way things have always been done isn't necessarily what's going to work in the future. So we're diving into topics that support HR and working women as they navigate the future of work. We're talking about professional growth and also how we can support each other as human beings.
We can't wait to bring you insights from HR experts, thought leaders, and inspiring women who are making a real difference in their organization and communities. They'll share their journeys and tips on balancing work and life in a better way. We're excited to learn alongside you and hope you'll pick up some great takeaways from tips and tricks to worksheets that you can actually use in your daily life. So grab your favorite beverage
or lace up your walking shoes and join us for the HR Her Resources podcast.
Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of the Her Resources podcast. We are so excited to be back in the studio today. Cyndi, how are you?
I am doing great. You and I had such a good conversation on our last episode about leadership.
Yes.
And so I'm very excited about our topic for today, authentic leadership.
Me too.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And we've got an amazing guest that you brought to the studio with us today. So I'm going to hand the reins over to you so you can introduce Priya to us.
That sounds great. Priya, welcome to the Her Resources podcast. We're so happy to have you. Just to give a little background on you, and then I'd love for you to add anything to this. But Priya Shah is a highly accomplished communications leader with over 14 years of experience. She must have started when she was like 10 years old.
Just a baby, exactly.
Right? Developing integrated marketing communication strategies and campaigns for B2B, consumer, and nonprofit organizations. Near and dear to my heart. Through a data-driven approach, she leverages her passion for storytelling to create compelling messages that drive brand awareness, enhance corporate reputation, and strengthen customer engagement. Priya has adapted her career to keep pace with a constantly evolving digital landscape, which we also spoke about recently. After honing her public relations and brand messaging skills at Edelman, Fleischman Hillard, and boutique agencies, she expanded her expertise to include social media, thought leadership, executive communications, employee engagement, and influencer marketing. Priya has collaborated with various companies from global corporations to high-growth startups across the technology, healthcare, SaaS, CPG, and hospitality sectors. Priya is the founder and principal of Shaw Squared Consulting. She is committed to empowering forward-thinking leaders to harness their authentic stories and expertise to elevate their reputation and build trust. She's based in Denver and is a member of the International Association of Business Communicators, IABC, which is where she and I met, and the ColorCom Network. She's a distinguished Toastmaster and is listed in Who's Who in America. Priya earned a Master of Liberal Arts from Boston University and holds a Bachelor of Science in Journalism and Mass Communications from Iowa State University. We are so pleased to have you. Welcome to the podcast.
Gosh, Cyndi, I wish you could have found someone with a little better background, I mean, could you found someone with a little more experience and
probably
leadership?
Not. I'm just going to say probably not.
No, so excited to have Priya here with us today.
And I'm so excited to be here. I'm just thrilled that I was able to connect with Cyndi and we were able to have this conversation. I'm so excited to dive deeper and share some insights and hear what both of you kind of think about this from your perspective and especially working in HR.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Priya. I think we should just dive right in. If there's nothing more in your bio that you want to add, as if there could be anything like there's so much there. But
the only thing that it doesn't say is that I am a very proud mom and I have a
Oh,
a soon to be 16-month-old. So
Oh my
well,
goodness.
that is
congratulations.
just not in there.
Yes.
And that
Oh,
should
wow.
be
That's
like at
probably
the
your,
very
that's right. Best accomplishment. Absolutely. Yes.
that is
No,
amazing. That's
for
awesome.
sure. Yeah.
Well, let's dive in, Priya, because so as I mentioned, Linda and I recently did an episode based on Gartner's 2025, top priorities for HR and just
Mhm.
for corporations in general. And so one of them, as always, is around leadership. And so when you and I were talking, you talked about authentic leadership. So just to kind of start us off, what do you mean by authentic leadership?
Sure. I think authentic leadership, in my eyes, really focuses on thinking about those lived experiences that you've had. We're all individuals. We can't necessarily all get put into a box, even with whatever you see on the outside is not necessarily what you see and will ever see on the inside. And so for me, authentic leadership is really about thinking about those elements that you've had in the past and bringing those with you every single day as a
Mm,
leader, because we all start somewhere
yeah.
and we've all had experiences. We've all been interns at one point in our life. We all have different cultural experiences, backgrounds, things that have happened to us that have shaped maybe even the trajectory of the way in which we live our lives or how it's shaped our career. So
Yeah.
that is so important to me is do not forget about all of those things that make you who you are.
I love that. Like you can't just leave it at the door, right?
I
It's just
like
Exactly.
that.
part of who you are. Yeah.
Hmm.
Well, and I was reading there's a quote by Bill George, who's an author on authentic leadership. And one
Mm.
of the things that he said was leadership begins with self awareness, knowing your strengths, and staying aligned with your values.
Hmm.
There
And
you
that,
go.
that
Think
kind of
more.
just captures all of that amazing stuff you were just talking about. It's so,
Yeah.
so important. But I wonder, as you think about that a little bit though, Priya, because, we talk about authentic leadership all the time, but I'm just curious, like, what are your thoughts on, can you be trained to be an authentic leader? Is it like, are you just naturally authentic? Like, what does it take to be an authentic leader? And why is that so important, especially today?
I think it's probably more comfortable for some, but I don't think it's something that you either have or you don't. I think it really comes down to even those that maybe present as authentic leaders. That does come back to the quote you just mentioned. It's that self awareness, it's being able to reflect on who you are and being comfortable with it. I think it comes a lot from doing that work of
Mhm.
really thinking about not your company values. What are your
Mhm.
personal values? What is your
Mhm.
purpose in life? What's driving you every single day? And if you can answer those questions, then I think you're able to be authentic. But keep in mind that changes. That's not something that is
Yeah.
stagnant. So it requires ongoing work. So if anybody were ever to say, well, I don't think I can be an authentic leader, well, that just means you haven't wanted to dive into that work of thinking about who you are. Because if you keep that and hold that dear to your heart every single day, it's going to come naturally, but it also is going to be taking reminders because we all have had moments, I think, in life where we get kind of those hits where we think about, you know, the dark side of life and maybe get some pessimistic thoughts and all sorts of things
Yeah.
are happening in our personal lives and what's going on outside of our personal lives in our companies and politics, all of those things, and they can kind of muddy the waters of where we
Mhm.
want to be. And so important for us to come back to who we are and do it often,
Yeah.
because it's really something where if you don't keep that regular practice, it's so easy to forget.
Why do you think now? Like, that's always a thing that, when you look at a
That's a
lot
good
of these things,
question.
Cindy and I talk about this frequently. If you read a lot of the books and these are not new books. They weren't written, a couple years ago. Most of these books, even the whole thing about, everybody's big into growth mindset and fixed mindset, that book has been
Yeah.
around for a very long time. And so why now? Why is this so important today when we've been talking about it for years?
I think it really comes down to the access that we have today. And we're all in a position where there's so much digital access to
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
Before in the past, you could kind of isolate. You could be within your company or within your smaller community. But now we have things like Glassdoor and LinkedIn and just doing Google searches and being able to dive deep into what people are doing personally through their own channels. And so I think it's putting it just at the front right now because it's so in our face.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah,
more than what it's
absolutely.
ever been in the past.
Yeah.
It's more accepted now too, I think, to be your authentic self. It used to be, you kind of had to leave your personal baggage is how it kind of
Yeah.
people used to refer to it, right? At the front door. I come to work, I'm here to work. It is more accepted to be your authentic self, to be vulnerable. And honestly, the leaders that I most gravitate towards are those that look like a full person, right? Have the DNA of, I'm not this perfect picture. There's
Mhm.
a lot of different sides to me.
Well, and Cindy, I
Yeah.
think Priya said something really interesting as well. I think you and I might have been around a little bit longer than Priya, and um, but I'm thinking what she said there around that social media, Glassdoor, all of that.
Yeah.
Do you think that part of that too is like you can't hide behind it anymore? I know
Good
you and I
point.
used to talk about this frequently that we'd see leaders who were we'd read about them in magazines, and these were leaders we worked for that we'd read about them. You'd like, they didn't do that. They just have really good PR people, right? But who
Yeah.
knew? Who knew that? Who could say that that was just a really great, public relations approach to leadership versus that true authentic leadership? So it sounds like what I'm hearing is that a lot of this has you can't hide anymore. So you're either going to be out there and you're going to be who you are, or you're not, and you're going to be
You're
accepting of
going to
that as
be
well,
found
right?
out as well,
hmm
too, right?
Yeah.
So, Priya,
Yeah.
why do you think? Oh, I'm sorry. Were you going to say
Oh,
something?
sorry.
Go ahead.
Yes,
No, you go
I
ahead,
was
Priya.
thinking
Yeah.
back to, that polished look of
Yes.
authenticity that was
Mhm.
part of the past. As you know, I
Yeah.
came from the public relations side. I know that side. I know
Yeah.
how it works with, who's actually presenting the drafts and then where they go. And
Yeah.
it's a lot of the times it's just that sign off. And so in these circumstances, what you're seeing, and this is where I think, the authentic leadership piece has been also at the forefront because people can also see through when people
That's
are
right.
being inauthentic, when it
Yeah.
is the internal comms or it's the,
Yeah.
public relations team that's building out what you're doing and it doesn't feel exactly right. It feels a little
Yeah.
bit too polished or maybe the
Yes.
language is a little bit off and people are also open to calling that out. And so you see the other
Yeah.
side of it too.
Right.
Yeah.
So, do
That's
you
true.
make that recommendation then when you're working with a corporation, for example, and you're working with their leaders? How do you sort of coach them on how to be
Good
authentic and
question.
why it's
Yeah.
important, Priya?
So I think especially when it comes to something like social media, there's this mindset of I'll just kind of phone it in. Oh, I have a whole team. They can just do it. But it
Mhm.
really does make a difference when you have a
Mm.
leader who really cares and says,
Yes.
that doesn't sound like me. I'm not going to put that out there because it is
Yeah.
attached to their name. And really, I think when I can tell a leader cares about it is when they come and I see a bunch of red marks around what they
Good.
actually want to say, or they want to make it more personable and they want to be able to highlight the unique characteristics of how they speak. And they're very casual, or they want to add certain terms that they like to use. And then I think, especially thinking about it from a corporation, then your employees can actually say, oh, I heard those terms that you use on a town hall. And oh, that really is that person speaking to me and
Yeah.
caring about what they're saying, even in these different mediums.
Yeah. And it
Yeah.
resonates
Like
with
that.
me. And So, Linda, you and I worked for a guy years ago, Jack McDonald at McData and high tech company. And I used to say, I was in HR at the time, and I used to say, people would follow that man off of a cliff. And it was because he was who he was. You didn't get a different Jack when you talked to him one-on-one. You didn't get a different Jack when he was in a town hall. And he was very humble. He was very introverted, actually. And he was just an endearing person. And so he had a vision. He could share what that vision was. He didn't even have a great PR person like you, Priya. He just shared it openly. And we all used to say we would follow that man off of a cliff.
Yeah. Yep. I agree. And there was a lot around that with open, honest communication as well, because I know I've had the good fortune of having a couple of those types of leaders. Aaron Ain, who was the CEO for Kronos, was another one. Very similar backstory to Jack McDonald as well as to how the company came about. And I think there's something to be said for that too, and the roots of how those companies evolved. But a very authentic leader who also worked in every single aspect of the business throughout his career. And that was similar with Jack. Jack worked he did manufacturing, he helped with the sales, he helped on all of those. So there's a different level of understanding. One of the things that I always found frustrating in leaders were you would find people who were in those roles who had never had any practical working experience, right? They might have come out of college, big degrees, landed these big jobs. Maybe they were recruited in. And the problem that I find sometimes around that, to find that true authenticity, if you've never walked in the shoes of the people that you're leading, it's kind of hard to lead authentically then, because you don't really know, unless you're going to take the time to kind of come down come down on the floor and understand how things are done. So I'm curious, Priya, when you're working with leaders, how do you help guide them in those situations? Because you do have both sides, those who grew into those leadership roles and then those who are placed into those leadership roles. And I think, you can have two different experiences.
I agree. I think that's where, again, that reflection piece comes in, of really being able to not only think about your values and your purpose, but also thinking about your strengths and your weaknesses. And so if your weakness is that you were placed in a leadership role and that's really all that you know, then in order for you to be well-rounded, you need to then focus and prioritize going and meeting the people and hearing their stories and being able, because you can't live that life, but you can sit and have a genuine conversation and share a cup of coffee and hear from the people what their experiences are and really sit and think about it. And I would say even more so, have the conversation and make sure you have space afterwards to process a thing and write down notes.
That. Yeah.
Yeah. That's
and
a really
how
good point.
wonderful must people feel who are on the front lines, right? When I do change management, I always say, get the opinions of the people actually doing the work on the front lines. We need the leaders to lead. That's so important. But you need to know what a day in the life looks like. And Priya, what you're describing there is a great way to do that.
Yeah.
And it's
I really like,
approachable.
that is
Right.
approachable.
Yeah.
I agree.
Absolutely.
Priya, I'm curious, like one of the things that I've often talked about with leaders and trying to understand, and these are more senior leaders, because I think right now I feel like we're talking a little bit at the executive level, but I'd like to bring it down a couple notches as we continue, because authenticity and leadership flows through the whole organization, right?
That's right.
At all levels. But I'm curious, one of the things that I find really challenging, and with your background in communications and public relations, sometimes, if you're the employee, we're always complaining about, we want to hear the facts. Give us the facts. Like, we want to know why things are happening and we want to know when they're happening. And that's not always possible in corporate America, right? There is a time and a place, and there is so much you can communicate, things you can't communicate. But I'm curious, like, how do you guide leaders in authentic communication as well? Because that makes or breaks sometimes the culture of an organization, right?
Yeah.
It does. And I think, there are PR people in place and there's legal teams in place for reasons.
Right.
And there are certain things you can and cannot say, especially if you're a publicly traded
Right.
company.
Yeah.
But I think this all comes back to just the delivery sometimes too. And even if you
I like.
can't share,
Yeah. Yeah.
saying that, I really wish I could dive deeper into this, but it's just not something that I can do. But I want you to know that I feel for you, or that
Yeah.
I'm listening. I think that there's so much value in just telling people, I
Right.
Yeah.
hear you. I
Yep.
hear you. We're having conversations about this. And I want you to know that when you approach me or when you share things with me, I'm listening to everything that you're saying, and we're having
Mhm.
conversations, and I'm making sure I'm representing you behind closed doors.
Mm,
I like that.
I
Yeah,
love
that's a really
that.
good advice. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that I'm representing
Exactly.
what I'm hearing
That I
behind those
really like.
closed doors.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That your
I
voice is not silenced just
yes.
because, we can't openly discuss this. I can take that and I can deliver that back. I like that. I think
It's
that's really good.
honest. Yeah.
It is.
And that's transparency too, where
Yes.
it's being
Mhm.
able to share. I can't share. That's just, that's
Yeah.
transparency.
Yeah,
Yes.
right.
Yeah.
Such a
I
good
agree.
point.
And
Yeah.
people do understand that. I mean, I don't think that we're, that it's such a reach to recognize that, to your point, if you're a publicly traded company, there are certain things you just can't
Mhm.
put out there. And so but I think when what exactly what you just described there, in just being more transparent in the communication, and when you
Mm,
can say, I can't share that with you right now, but when I can,
Mhm.
I will share that information with you. That just goes such a long way to build trust, I think, too, which I think trust is such an important part of authentic leadership as well, right? Because you could be
Mhm.
the most authentic sounding person out there, but if I don't trust you, then
mm,
everything that I hear you say sounds inauthentic to me, then at that point,
Mhm.
right?
I think that's where doing this work and being able to speak in this way in front of and of anyone. I think this is
mhm.
regardless of the room, being that, having that be the background is the way in which you speak. Um, how you build the trust. It's really important to think about, these are the stepping stones to trust, because it doesn't happen overnight. It is something
Right.
that takes time. But if you say, for example, like we just said, hey, I will follow up with you when I can share this information, and I will keep you updated, then hold yourself accountable and do that. And make sure that
Mhm.
that is something that you don't drop the ball on, because that's when I think really everyone's starting to question your authentic.
I agree.
So Priya, what can leaders do? And Linda, I love that you said at like all levels, right? Because I think
Yeah.
even like those frontline supervisors, middle managers,
Yeah.
other levels of leadership are just as important for different
Mhm.
reasons, right? So how can leaders build those muscles?
Yeah. Great question.
Well, first and foremost is, when was the last time you went and reflected and journaled about your experience, personal, professional?
Mm,
I think
I
a
like
lot of
that.
us hold
yeah.
them to the side and we forget about it. And so
Mhm.
do that as if you haven't done it in a long time, then do that as a full activity, but it should be something maybe that you do quarterly, whatever time kind of works with everything else that's going on in your life.
Yeah.
But it's really important, I think, to stay humble by remembering where you came from. It goes back to those lived
Yeah.
experiences of, I think, really write down your story. Who are you? What are
Right.
your values? What
Yeah.
is your purpose? Write it all down. It's so important to get it out there and have it there. And that, I
Mm.
think, is almost, it becomes your manifesto of, okay, who am I? I can tell you because I know who I am,
Yeah.
and here it is.
Yeah, and even
I
where
like
did
that.
that come from? Like
Y
my
yeah.
childhood, my grandma, whatever.
I like that.
Mhm.
I was just gonna share one of the things that we've done in our organization is through our employee resource groups, and one of them is
Mm.
called Fire Up. And one of my colleagues there, Talana Felix, kind of came up with this whole idea where they do this podcast review type of thing, and what they'll do is they take one of the leaders and then you get anybody else in the organization who has passion about that. They select, they get to know each other, they learn a little bit, and then they talk about it in this open forum where everybody comes. It's on, a Teams or Zoom type of setting, and you're all there with that leader, and you get to talk to them very one-on-one. And I know for me, I got the opportunity to host one of those with one of our leaders. I learned so much just in the prep, and it completely changed my opinion of that
Interesting.
person for all the things you were just talking about there, Priya, is that I really didn't know they actually came from very humble beginnings, which I would not have assumed because they were an Ivy Leaguers. So you assume things about a person when you
That's right.
don't know. And then learning like that this person was also very introverted. I'm very introverted. And so being able to have that connection and then just the way that they are with their children, their daughters, and that it completely like I had a whole different feeling about that person and about that leader from that experience. And I thought it's a nice safe way because there's some structure around it. So it's not just an open forum where you put the leader on a
Yeah.
stool and get to grill them. It's more like let's take a common interest in something and then we'll talk about it together, and it humanizes, I think, a lot of those leaders as well when you kind of see them a little bit differently. So
I love that word too. It humanizes that person.
yeah.
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 I was going to
Yep.
say the two words that stuck out were humanized. But I also really love the fact that, and this is where that authentic piece comes in, was connection. You felt
Yes.
connected because you
Yep.
saw something in the past of that leader that you could really relate to. And that's where
Absolutely.
authentic leadership comes from is now, I think even from a middle manager standpoint, it's that when you feel connected to someone, you are just going to operate in a very different way as an employee, as a leader, all of those different things. But if you don't feel like you have any ties, then it is
Mm-hmm.
transactional. Is
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm coming in, I'm doing my job, I'm signing off, and I have
Check the box.
zero, yeah, I have zero commitment here. I don't care.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
absolutely. And I do
Yeah.
think that that's how some leaders, and maybe it's a safety kind of a thing. And I'm seeing more and more leaders opening up to your point, Priya, to the
Yeah.
connection. And I loved how you said, Linda, I didn't feel connected to this person. And then I did my homework and found out like most people don't just instantly become leaders out of college. So, there is a journey there. And when we understand their journey, it's like,
Yep.
it's a little more endearing. I'm like, oh, they actually had
Yeah.
to work pretty hard to get to where they are,
Yes.
you know?
Yeah. Because assumptions about people and their
Yeah,
background. We always say in the absence of facts, we just make things up, right? So,
absolutely.
yeah. No,
Well,
it's so true.
and one thing I know with kind of thinking about that flexing of the muscles is that it's worth saying it's not going to be perfect the first time, and it's probably
Mm,
never going to be perfect. It's going to be trial
Yeah.
and error. And especially for someone who's maybe very uncomfortable, or maybe there's shame around some of the things that have happened in their past, or they feel
Yep.
like, oh, I made a
So
lot of
true.
mistakes. I don't want to hide those mistakes because they're not looking at them as lessons learned. They're looking at them as setbacks. And so I think also when leaders are wanting to become more authentic and they're testing things out, they might also have things come up that maybe they didn't even know were holding them back that are worth exploring if
Yeah.
you're starting to have these conversations and emotions are coming up.
yeah.
Mhm.
Explore why.
I like that. Well, we talk a lot about emotional intelligence, and we say that that's really important, and the best leaders have, emotional intelligence. But I'm curious too, from both of your perspectives, like, how does that happen too? Because I don't think, again, like we've been talking about authenticity, to your point, Priya, can actually be something that you can learn. You don't have to be either be or not be. You can learn if you want to put the effort into it. What about emotional intelligence? Because, I think some people are like, well, I'm just emotionally stunted. And so it's just not in me to be that way. What do you think about those types of conversations, which is kind of around what we were talking about, even like self-awareness and those, but how do
That's
you
right.
build the emotional intelligence to be able to, to kind of bring that to the organization?
Sure. Cindy, do you want to go first?
Just one quick thing, and then Priya, very interested in what you have to say. But I think you need to first ask that leader or that person moving into a leadership role, are you, it's not going to be comfortable. We're going to hold up a mirror. And so they also have to have trust in the people coaching them, people like you, Priya, who help
Point.
leaders to get to that level, right?
Yeah.
I do think it's something that, again, emotional intelligence, I think some people just are born with it. I do also, and
Yeah.
you guys
Yeah.
might disagree
Mhm.
with this, but I also do think that there are some things that can be done through supporting the person, making them feel comfortable and supported, that psychological safety to where it's like, it's
Yeah.
okay to open up. It's okay to share some of your background.
Yeah.
This is how you're going to get, Priya, to your point, to your story, and to your
Yeah.
manifesto. So just a few thoughts
Mhm.
from me, but Priya, very interested in what you have to
Yeah.
say.
Yeah, I love that, Cindy. I really think it is something where I look at it from the perspective of my dad. There was a time and place when it really was unacceptable to show any emotion. You
Mhm.
had to show up as a certain type of person, especially in the workplace, if you wanted to build your career and you wanted to get to the top or you wanted to continue to work with clients. And it's been really interesting to watch him evolve from being someone who was so kind of just rigid, I would also say,
Mhm.
in the way in which he would approach things as factual or not. And also bear in mind he's an accountant. So it also comes down to if it doesn't make dollars, it doesn't make sense to him. But it really, I've watched him open up over the years and I think become
I love that.
comfortable in who he is. And so I do think emotional intelligence is something that you can learn, but I also think it's something that you have to be open to. So if you want to
Yeah.
continue to be kind of closed off, and that is just, that's your comfort zone, then admit it and be okay with that and know that it might just be a little bit more challenging and it might be a stumbling block that will prevent you from going to further levels,
Yes.
or it will create a stigma or some sort of perception from me and be okay with that.
Yeah.
You brought up a really good point in all of that too. So Cindy and I obviously are big advocates for women, but I wonder too. There's a big difference between women and men as we talk about this. There's also some assumptions. We assume that women are more authentic. We
Right.
assume that women are more in touch with their emotions, but in my experience, that is not always true. And then we also assume the same about men. We assume that men are, and I'm curious too, as we're kind of watching some of the things that have changed over the last year or so, there almost seems to be like this resistance from men in the societal view of like we were kind of embracing the emotional intelligence, self awareness, and all the. Now all of a sudden it's kind of like, ooh, now we're feeling a little more uncomfortable around that. Well, I want to go back to like men are men and women are women type of approach to things. So I'm curious from both of you as we're watching this, how do we ensure that we don't lose what we've worked so hard to build? And what is that difference between men and women? And is that okay for us to have those differences in how we approach authenticity in the workplace?
Priya, what are your thoughts on that? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's really interesting too, because I've had the same experience as Linda of, thinking that, oh, well, just because they're a certain gender, then they're going to fall into these buckets. That's not true at all. I think that goes back to the lived experiences. A lot of the times you'll be able to understand because of the lessons that they've learned or the people that have taught them
Mhm.
along the way to be
Yeah.
okay with certain things. And so for me, I think it really comes down to, I just feel like we keep putting people in boxes. So I really don't like that.
Yes.
But, um, but I think it's just reminding people of why it's great to be authentic and what it means. And, having the machismo mindset is really something of the past. And I think that's where we can highlight why from more of that actual standpoint of why it's important. So then going after, the reasons for it and touching things that maybe seem a little bit more business minded of, okay, well, if we can showcase how being an authentic leader impacts the bottom line, then I think it will
Yeah.
provide more of an interest. So it's speaking their language is what I would probably say.
Who's your audience that you're, that you're kind
Yeah.
of targeting with that too?
Well, we saw that with equity, inclusion, and diversity too, right? When organizations started to look at it through the lens of how does it affect my bottom line, there was a different perspective on looking at bringing those types of programs into their organizations. Now we're kind of slipping backwards a little bit these days, but I do think you're absolutely right. Is tying it back to a purpose sometimes helps. Especially in the world of business, not in the world of life, but in the world of business, we are a capitalist society we live in. It's about making money, and so it is really important to think about that. But we can't lose the human side of all of it. I really
That's right.
feel like COVID opened up a door for us to identify humanity a little bit more in the workforce, and I don't want to see us lose that. I think it was a good thing that came out of
That
COVID.
was one of the good things.
Right. And I think that from an intangible standpoint, which you could technically put a monetary number on, but when you're not being authentic as a leader, you're also going to lose people. You're going to lose
That's right.
talent. And you're going to then experience even more hardship because this talent is what's behind all of the financial numbers that you are able to achieve. And so I think being able to also highlight some of this come with keeping your talent retention around and being able to highlight how expensive it is. I think a lot of people don't understand how expensive it is to hire someone new.
As
And
opposed to retaining your good people. And
Yeah,
absolutely.
that's true.
I
No,
agree.
it's really important. Cyndi, I'm curious, from a change perspective, like what kind of guidance do you give to leaders and to really to organizations, not even necessarily to the top leadership, but as we were talking about throughout the organization
Right.
leadership, because sometimes, I mean, you and I know change starts at the bottom sometimes. It doesn't always start at the top. And then
Grassroots. Yep.
exactly. And then you kind of hope to get the top and then we bring it all together, right? But I'm kind of curious, like how are you guiding organizations as we think about this as well, especially in the world of authentic communications and leadership, but the change that needs to occur in order for that to happen.
Yeah, and one of the things that I was going to add to what you shared, Priya, is, and maybe this is putting people in a box as well, but I do find pretty consistently when I ask organizations as we're kind of getting ready for organizational changes, are there any groups that we want to give extra care and love to as we go through this change? And sometimes it is generational. I mean, I know my grandpa, and he was in Pearl Harbor. So just to give you a little bit of context there, right? And we all talk about many times how wonderful, we called him Buddy, how wonderful Buddy was and how emotionally intelligent he was. Why are we surprised by that, right? But, so sometimes it is sort of just how you were brought up, how prevalent was technology, how prevalent was social media. I find, Gen Z, millennials are much more open to a lot of the authenticity and things it's just something that they've grown up with. So as organizations are going through change, as I'm coaching their managers and their leaders, especially people leaders, it's back to what you were saying, Priya, have those conversations with people, be willing to be open, be willing to be transparent, tell them what you can tell them, tell them what you cannot tell them, make sure they know what's in it for them, so all those kinds of things. But again, there are times where, because I've been in the role I've been in forever, the only next move for me is vertical. So I also have conversations with organizations about, hey, are there opportunities for high performers to get involved in other ways? Maybe they are going to be a great leader. Let's test the water. Let's have them be involved as a change champion in this initiatives and in this transformation. Let's see how they do. Let's see how they connect with people. Those could be good managers in the future, good leaders in the future. So
I like that. That's really great advice. Yeah, that's really good. I think that's a cool strategy, Cyndi. I mean, because that is a good way to test the water without throwing them into the deep end of the
directly.
pool. Right? Yeah, exactly. So it's a chance for them to feel out and see if they're even comfortable, because a lot of
That's
people are just
right.
not comfortable in those situations, right? So why ask them to do something that's not going to be healthy or beneficial for them in the long run? So
That's right.
I like that. No, that's really good. Well, I'm kind of curious too, Cyndi touched on this with the generational component of it. One of my most favorite generational speakers out there is Kristen Scroggin with Gen Y. And she came from the UAB. She was a professor there. She's done a ton of research around multi-generational, but she's hilarious in how she delivers it, because it makes you kind of look at yourself and laugh a little bit. But I do think that because we do have most of the generations are still in the workforce today, and it is really important to think about that. I think what I find sometimes, we had talked with our friend Jennifer Fairweather. I asked her this question one time, Cyndi, when we were talking about the younger generation, and what you were just saying, they were more open to things, but they're also can be very critical of those of us who maybe grew up in a different time and a different environment, and we're still learning. And what she said is, I always say, give grace, right? You've got to give grace in situations. But I'm curious, Bri, I mean, it is really hard to think organizationally, how do I take into consideration all the different generations, and how do we navigate through that? Because you're not going to make everybody happy all the time, right? So how do you kind of approach that as well?
I think it's exactly what you just said. It's thinking about, okay, how can I make the most people happy? There's always going to be outliers. It's just the reality of the situation. And I think it goes back to thinking about, where can I learn? What are some of the places where I do have the weakness, where I think about, some of the lessons around grammar that existed, where I've had conversations with older generations of, well, I can't understand, why would I put they in that sentence? Because that doesn't make grammatical sense based off of what I've learned and been doing in writing for all of these years. But the way in which we're writing is different now, because we are more inclusive. So I think a lot of it is just being able to practice and learn. And also, I think this is where I kind of want to focus on reminding everyone that we're human. And so while we're practicing and while we're trying to do better, we're probably going to slip up, and we're going to kind of resort back to comfortable as we're learning. That's what always happens. You mess up, please don't put people on blast. They're trying to do their best. And letting one small mistake be the one thing that they did to basically cut them out of being put into a certain kind of mindset. So saying, for example, oh, they use the wrong terminology there, they don't care about me. That's not true.
Right.
Yeah.
Goes back to grace.
Definitely.
Yeah.
It does. Cyndi, from a change perspective, how are you guiding organizations in that multi-generational approach, especially, like you were talking about the people leaders, because it is really important to understand who your employees are, right, and how they receive communication. I've kind of always subscribed to the idea that it's my job as a leader to modify my behavior to my employees, not expect my employees to modify their behavior to me because that's impossible to expect all of them to be like me. But I can adapt and adjust, right, based on who I'm talking to. How do
Yeah.
you help guide organizations around that?
And that's a role, again, going back to authentic leadership, right? If I am an authentic leader, I'm going to say kind of what you were saying too, Priya, is I'm going to go and talk to my Gen Z. I am so like energized by the Gen Z, by the millennials that I get to work with, but also by the people that I learn from who are in my generation or older than me as well. So one word I would use, and I use this word a lot, but curiosity. Go and talk to people, ask them, and especially kind of going back to those change champions, who your champions are in an organization, whether they have that title or not. Go to those folks, different generations, and just say, hey, this is a really important initiative. This is a really important communication that we're building awareness about something that's changing. I would love to get your eyes across this and just see, what are some things that I could do, include, not include, back to what you're saying, Priya, to make it more inclusive so that it feels like something that people can get behind. Because I don't have all the answers. It should never come down to just one person. And I think an authentic leader is going to invite other people to the table to be a part of those conversations before anything mass communication goes out.
I like
I
that.
agree.
No, that's real good. Well, so Priya, I'm curious. We've talked a lot about, the coaching and the things that you do, but I'm curious, why did you go into this? Like, what made
Yeah.
this? Why is this your passion? Like, I know why Cyndi does what
Sure.
she does, and I've got a good understanding of why I ended up where I did. But why this? Why is this important to you?
Yes, this has been something that I think has always been important to me, but I didn't understand it as being a focal point until later in life. And I really think it comes down to be honest, when I became a mom, I started thinking about what I wanted to present and what was really important to, I think, build the right future for my son. And
Yeah.
so for me, that came down to I had been holding back. I had been holding back on pieces of my past, of things I had done that I had looked at more from that pessimistic lens of saying,
Mm-hmm.
hey, I wish I would, coulda, shoulda in this
Yeah.
scenario, and I would be here now if I would have made that decision, or if I knew now what I, wish I would have known then, or vice versa. You can't go back in that mindset. And so for me, it was realizing there's probably more people like me out there that have stories to share that they've been afraid to share that are relatable, and it does make people feel connected and included. And so by bringing that to a corporation, bringing that to founders, to entrepreneurs, to people that are able to evoke the change, then
Yeah.
it's going to be that more of that ripple down effect. And then for the next generation, being able to just build those skills, it's just those innate skills. We're going to see a huge change in the future.
Yeah.
We keep
That is so
I
true.
love that because we do keep kind of seeing that, right? The authenticity. And thanks for sharing that with us, Priya. I think that, again, kind of goes back to being authentic, but also it just shows how you were willing to take a look in the mirror and say,
Yeah.
what can I do to, in my small part of the world, because the world is huge, but if there's something I can do, what would I do? And I'm so excited for you and for organizations who get to work with you, that this is
Absolutely.
a passion of yours. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Priya, what are a few things you'd leave our listeners with? Like, what are some important points that you're like, I want to make sure that we get this point across in this conversation?
Sure. I think really the biggest thing for me is that when you think about some of these things with authentic leadership, whether you're all the way in the C suite or you have big aspirations and goals and you're you're in high school right now, whatever,
Yeah.
whatever place you are in your career. I think the biggest thing is start small, please. Regardless of where you're at,
Good
start small,
advice.
because one of
Yep.
the biggest things that I've seen is that everyone wants to do everything all at once. And then what happens is maybe you'll keep with it a month, and then all of a sudden everything just implodes, and then you stop doing it all. So
Yeah.
really think about bite-sized pieces when
Love.
you're trying to adopt some of these elements of authentic leadership. It's not going to happen overnight, but what are some small things that you can do? And once you feel like those have been really honed and those skills are now
Mhm.
just part of you, what can you take on
Yeah,
next?
I like that.
I
Yeah.
love
Bite
that.
size. Mhm.
And it's kind of
Yep.
full circle. It's like if something doesn't feel authentic to you, it's not going to feel authentic. It's not going to come across as authentic, right? So
Yeah.
to your point, like try those things, feel kind of what makes a difference for you, and then that goes in the toolkit. If it doesn't,
Mhm.
gets tossed. That's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
Exactly. No,
love that,
I like
Priya.
that. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
this has been such a great conversation. I'm so glad we got to have you on, Priya. We'd love to have you come back as we continue
I
on
love
our
that.
journey with our podcast,
Yes,
and talk more together. You bring such a great insight
yes.
to the conversation. And Cyndi, thanks for introducing our guests to Priya. What an amazing
Yeah.
connection for them to have. So Priya, what give a shout out. I know Cyndi kind of gave a little bit on your company, but give a little
Sure.
shout
Please,
out about your
please.
company and let everybody know, like, what you do and how they can get in contact with you.
Yes.
Definitely. So Just Word Consulting has gone through kind of its own evolution where I started out in the hospitality world, providing full service communications, and now in what I'm calling Just Word 2.0, it's really focused on being able to support the leaders. So if you're interested in building your personal brand, particularly LinkedIn to build your personal brand,
Mhm.
I come in and I'll help you with profile and building you a plan and being basically your sounding board to build a content calendar and think about
Love that.
building in aspects of authentic leadership. But then on the flip side, I love working with companies that maybe are in positions where they can't hire a high level strategist to come in and do
Yeah.
their social
Mhm.
media. So I'll come in and be able to build you that full strategy that then you can utilize the team that you have, or I'll come in and do workshops and skill share with
Mm,
being able to include more strategies so that then they're able to utilize, all the resources available, knowing that the realistic standpoint is that they can't afford to hire somebody at that level, but that doesn't mean that they shouldn't deserve to get those same,
yeah.
plans and playbooks.
I love that. No, that's great. Well, we'll put Priya's contact
Yes.
information in the show notes, so we'll
Perfect.
make sure that we link her out there. And again, I just want to thank you both for such what a great way to start out the day. I mean, with this
Always.
conversation. Yeah. So
Yeah.
thank you both, and I hope that you have a wonderful Christmas holiday. And we'll be back in the new year for lots more fun. So, Cyndi, as always, thank you.
Thank you, Linda. And thanks to our community. Thank you to Priya. I think this was such a
Sure.
great topic to sort of round out our year, right,
Oh
Linda?
my gosh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Yep, I love it. So, thank you, Priya, and we'll be back for our next episode. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of the HR Her Resources podcast. We're so happy to have you with us on this journey. Music and production by Logan Misegadis of LJM Productions. We'd also like to thank our intern, Lauren Banas, for creating our logo and supporting our social media postings. If you'd like to connect with Logan or Lauren, you can find their information in the show notes. If you found value in our discussion and think someone else might as well, please follow and subscribe to our LinkedIn and share with a friend. Until our next episode, please take care and continue to support one another.